Good day, students, and welcome to this video lesson. This is your coach Carlex, and I am going to discuss the database security. So, for this lesson, as I have said, we are going to tackle, or I am going to discuss the importance of, or how does the security differs when it comes to database security and sa ibang security na alam natin. When it comes to, kasi most of you knows that a company or some organizations have the security, the basic feature of a system is a security. But sometimes there's a misconception or something na overlook na kapag secured na yung system, it also means na secured na rin yung database. But sometimes hindi ganun yung case. There are some instances that even you have the most yung pinaka-secured na system na hindi ka makaka-penetrate ng anything or hindi ka makaka-penetrate basta-basta, pero when it comes to the database mas ma-access mo siya. So there are some cases like that. So how does database security is being implemented and anong pinagkaiba niya? So security is a major concern for most systems, network or database administrators. One of the requirements of any database is to be able to protect the data from unauthorized usage or malicious attacks. So a database system must ensure that all authorized personnel can easily access any information available to them. In the contrary, all unauthorized users must not have in any form access to data. In today's world, the security of the data in a database is the primary concern. Exposure of personal information such as the social security numbers, the credit card information, or medical information to the public can bring some lawsuits or even government fines and issues. Even with this, the theft of or exposure of information can still be performed anywhere. So due to this, the old-fashioned way in securing data is no longer applicable. So the security issues that the database users or administrators must address are broken down into basic situation as follows. So you have the accessing data in a table should be limited only to qualified users. So sometimes even you have the access to the database, you should also consider that even you have the access, dapat certain or specific tables lang ang pwede mo ma-access or specific data lang sa isang table ang dapat mong ma-access, or even na may access lahat, hindi lahat pwedeng magkaroon ng pare-parehong privilege when it comes to accessing that specific table. Let's say for example, you have two users, user 1 and user 2 both have access to the same table, but there could be a variation when it comes to the level or to the of the level of the data that they can access or they can do to the data. Like for example, user 1 can actually modify the data, but user 2 can just view it. So it means that the two users have both access to that specific table, but only different but varies in the when it comes to the level of the access. Next, you have the modifying tables must be limited only to qualified users with administrator rights. Okay, going back, as I have mentioned on the number one example here, or the number one consideration, said that user 1 pwede niyang ma-modify yung table. But although if that is the case, that user should be a qualified user with an administrator right. So when it comes to the administrator rights, that depends, or that is being assigned by the main or the admin of a specific system, or sometimes the database administrator. Now, accessibility to columns or rows of a table must be defined for certain users. It's the same with this one. So before, akala natin, pag nagkaroon ka lang ng access sa database, that's all, or kaya nagkaroon ka ng access to this table, yun na yun. But hindi ganun yun. This is how it goes. Sometimes you all have same access, you can access the same table, but you'd have a different, but all of you varies from when it comes to the level of the access. Let's say I can access table 1, you can access table 2, but I can only do few compared to what you can do. Like for example, you can modify, you can actually delete, while my access can only, let's say, view it and search for it. That's all. So okay, so that's basically how the access level differs from one another. Okay, now let's have the security model. When it comes to the security model, it provides the basic syntax used to specify security restrictions. So there are three concepts of SQL security. We have the users, the objects, and privilege. So these three concepts actually, ito yung mga pwede mo lang ma-access, ma-modify, or magkaroon ka ng access. Okay? So let's say for example this one, as you can see here, this one is actually the diagram representation of what I have said a while. So when it comes to the concepts, when you say concepts, ito yung tatlong magva-vary lang yung access level mo. So let's say for example, you have the access for the different users, for the objects, and for the privileges. So this is just a representation or a diagram representation of what I have said here. So ayan lang siya. So if, as you can see, Mary has a full access to this personnel table, while this another girl, which I cannot read actually the name. Let's say let's Sue, maybe she's Sue. Sue has this certain access only, like for example the select, update, and insert. But it's not a full access. She cannot actually delete. Like unlike Mary, she has the full access, which means she can delete and everything. She has the access, all access. Now, when it comes to database security, user ID, we have the user ID. When we say user ID, actually it is the pair of it's a pair of username and password. So it's setting up the security begins with creating user IDs and passwords. That varies enormously from DBMS to DBMS. So it means that sometimes yung level or yung type ng username or password requirement can vary from another platform to another. So let's say for example some MySQL, this is the allowed character level or character number of characters and the character type. While on the different platform, like say for example for Oracle, there's another requirement when it comes to user ID and passwords. So in a security BMS, a user ID is a name password pair that allows some entity to perform actions in the database. So pag sinabi natin user ID, hindi lang siya user ID, the ID or the username. It is a name password pair. So kapag sa DBMS, when it's a DBMS, ayan yung mga common jargon natin, na kapag DBMS ang pinag-uusapan, pag sinabi natin user ID, pag sinabi ko, may I know your user ID or can I have my user ID? It means that it's a name and a password combination. Hindi lang siya yung user ID, ang bibigay mo lang yung user ID or the username. It should be a combination of name and password. So pag sa DBMS, user ID means a name and password pair. So these are the models or the concepts when it comes to security, database security. So we have the objects. The SQL standard defines security in terms of objects to which actions are performed. So in the SQL1 standard, the only objects that security is applied are tables and views. So yung mga objects na to, kung ano-ano yung mga tables, ano-ano yung mga objects na yan, like for example, yung tables tsaka views, yun yung sinasabi natin na maaaring ma-access ng isang user. So, we have this database security. So this, as you can see here, using the grant syntax, Freddy has the grant select when the TBL personnel, while John has the grant select and update to table orders and TBL personnel. So it's a different access level compared to Fred. Next, you have the privileges. So when we say the privileges, issued via the grant command and are taken away via the revoke command. So going back to your theory of database system, as you can remember, we have there's already a discussion or na-start na ng ma-familiarize kayo or magamit at ma-introduce sa inyo ang grant and revoke syntax. So these are yung grant ginagamit to give you the privileges and revoke is being used to revoke or to bawiin, to remove the privileges that has been given to a specific user. So the privileges that can be granted are divided into 4 groups. So you have the column privileges, you have the table privileges, you have the database privileges, and the user privileges. So when it comes to the column privileges, yung mga specific column ng isang table, yun yung mga pwede mong ma-access o magkaroon ng privilege. Table related to all data and one specific table. But when it comes to database, yung mismong database ang pinaka magkakaroon ka ng privilege, and when you say sa user privileges, it relate to all databases that are known to SQL. So for example, another one, there are two types of privileges. We have the system privileges and the object privileges. So what does the two saan sila nagkakaiba? How does system privilege differs from objects? So these are the following object privileges. So you have the select, insert, delete, update, references, alter, and index. So pag itong mga to ibinigay mo or grant mo to a specific user, you are actually giving them the object privileges. While when it comes to system privileges, you are actually giving them the right to change or alter the whole database. Say for example, mas madali siyang ma-identify if, let's say for example, if your access, let's say your access, you have the select and the insert access. If your access can only modify a specific object and then or a specific table, and then it only affects a certain database or a certain file or a certain transaction, it means that you are only gaining as an object privilege, or you only have an object privilege. But if you have a system privilege, whatever you do to your database will affect the whole process or the whole operation of the company or the whole operation of the organization. It means that you have a system privilege. So that's the difference of the two. So parang sa object privileges, yung mga maliliit na bagay sa loob ng database yung access mo. While when it comes to system privileges, you have the administrative access to alter or to modify a data that could affect the whole operation. Let's say for example, you are actually deleting the whole database. Obviously, the whole operation would be affected because you're actually deleting the database or modifying a specific property of a database, of the database. But if you're just going to modify one row of data from another table, it could affect the flow, or it could only affect a certain data, but it does not affect wholly the whole operation. Okay? So again, when you say system privileges, let's say for example, you rename a database. So when you rename a database, of course, the process or the system that is using that database cannot find that database anymore because you change it. Now, if that happens, your system cannot perform or cannot function correctly. So your operation is affected. But when it comes to this object privileges, let's say for example, you updated a record of a specific customer, so that customer was only the one affected and not the whole system. So that's the difference, or that's how you will identify if you're right or if your privilege is a system privilege or an object privilege. So when it comes to adding users, so some DBMS have SQL statements extensions, so the SQL standard specific to that DBMS that allow creating users. So again, going back to your theory of database, you were also able to create, or we were able to familiarize ourselves when it comes to adding users. So sometimes nagva-vary yan, or sorry, not sometimes. It really varies from one platform to another, from one DBMS to another DBMS. Oracle has a different way of creating user. As you can see here, it's create user, username identified by the password, globally as external name, and then options. While it's a different syntax when it comes to MySQL. In SQL, MS SQL, the syntax is as follows. It's grant connect to the user ID and then at starting ID and then identified by the password. Pag sa MySQL yan, it should be create user and then the username identified by password at localhost or what server you're going to create that user. So, ganun naman sa MySQL. So, nagva-vary yan depende sa DBMS na gamit mo. So when it comes to granting privileges, the basic grant statement is used to grant security privileges on the database object to specific users, or in some DBMS implementation to group. So the syntax is as follows. So you have this one. So this is the syntax for uh, Oracle. Now you have this one for MS SQL. Sorry, this is for the MS SQL syntax. And this one is an example of an MS SQL granting syntax. So when you say grant, select, update to the street column on the employee table to the user Laurel. So this is a MS SQL syntax. And then you also have the revoke privilege, wherein if you grant a specific privilege, you have also the right to revoke that privilege from a specific user. So use the revoke statement if you have granted privileges and later you need to revoke these privileges. So this is the syntax, and then you can also identify all the privileges that you have to revoke, because you can also revoke certain certain privilege lang, hindi lahat. So that's all for the database security, and I hope you learned something or two. So thank you for watching. Have a good day, and thank you.